Welcome everyone to episode 36 of the Average Ontario Anglers Fishing Podcast. My name is Jesse. I'm your host of this episode and the producer of this show. Oh yeah. And with me, as usual, is the legendary man with the mustache, Andrew.
Oh yeah, the face of the organization.
If this is your first time joining us, welcome. This is a podcast that is clean, informative, and relatable for the average angler.
Well, clean in the sense of, we don't swear, but
Andrew does smell a little bit.
I haven't showered in 17 days.
We have well over 1,000, actually almost 2,000 weekly listeners. So if this is your first time, welcome to the Average Ontario Anglers Fishing Community. We take suggestions for episodes directly from our listeners. So if you have any suggestions for future episodes that you'd like to hear, please send us a message on Instagram or email us, and I'll put our email address down below in the show notes. So Andrew and myself have been fishing together actually for over 20 years. So hopefully from our friendly banter today, we'll keep you a little bit entertained and possibly help you learn something new. So this week's show is one that I've wanted to do for a while, actually. It's a really good one. This one is how to improve as an angler. What do you think about that?
I think I know everything there is to know, and I'm going to zone out for the next hour. I'm just kidding. I need so much help. Teach me, Jesse.
So we actually have 5 topics that we're going to discuss this evening. Well, or whenever you're listening to it, we're recording it. It's in the evening. But these are the 5 points just to get you excited for the next hour or so. Point number 1, never stop learning. Number 2, understanding fish behavior.
Sorry, I missed that first one. What?
Never stop listening, Andrew. I'm just kidding. It's never stop learning. Number 2, understanding fish behavior and movement. Number 3, focus less on gear and more on presentation. Number 4, learn to find fishing spots. And number 5, the best one, don't compare yourself to others. So I think it'll be a pretty cool show. Me and Andrew are going to tell you some of the stuff that we personally have improved on in the last year. And maybe you can learn something so that next year you can improve on these things as well. But before we start, we have an interesting fishing fact. And with that, we have the man with the mustache, Andrew.
So
intrigue me.
Oh, well, you have had a ongoing fishing fact that you've sprinkled in a few different ones, and it's all about, as everyone knows, loons.
Yes, everyone loves the loons.
So I decided I need to come up with something that can also kind of be, I'll have enough information from it to have multiple interesting fishing facts so that it doesn't just, deplete all my information about it. So I decided to go with something that has enchanted me for years, something that I have loved, doing for since I was before I was fishing. I was doing this. I was catching frogs.
Oh yeah, classic.
We all live in Ontario. At some point, we have gone to a cottage or camping, and we've caught a frog.
Yep.
So with so many different species of frogs, now I'm gonna focus on one small aspect of the frog species, not species, I guess the frog family. In this interesting fishing fact, how do frogs hibernate? What do they do in the winter?
Don't they actually freeze?
Not all of them.
No? Okay.
But that's a little spoiler. That's good. It's my favorite one.
Okay.
So there's 3 different things that they will do. First of all, hibernating is what happens when an animal lowers its metabolism to a point where it uses very little energy. Even its heart rate and body temperature drop, and they typically do not eat. You think like bears, we all know bears hibernate and they just sit in a cave and sleep essentially. So they're doing something very similar. So when temperatures get too cold, frogs will inhabit a hibernaculum.
That sounds complicated.
A hibernaculum is just the little area that they chose to hibernate in.
Okay. So like a cave for a bear. That seems cliche.
So that cave is a bear's hibernaculum.
Okay.
So the first one I was going to talk about, or first method of hibernation that we find in our frogs in Ontario and in Canada, we think of a bullfrog. They go underwater all winter long. Not under the mud. A lot of people think they bury themselves in the mud, but they'll actually not have access to oxygen under the mud. So they'll go between 10 to 15 centimeters deep underwater, underneath the ice, and they will sit on top of the mud or the rock bottom that's really close to shore. And as long as the water is between 0 and 4 degrees Celsius, that's optimal. If it goes too low, they can die. And if it goes too high, they can die. Because now they can't get access out of the water, and they'll come out of hibernation. The reason why frogs, and a bullfrog is one example, just a common one. The reason why they can stay underwater all winter long is they can breathe through their skin.
Interesting.
Now, with this porous skin, they can breathe underwater, and in cold temperatures, water actually holds more oxygen. So that's why they really need that threshold as well. If it gets too warm and there's not enough oxygen, it's going to bring them out of hibernation, but they can't come out of the water because there's ice above them. So that's the first method, and that's what majority of the frogs will do in Ontario and Canada. The other one is another example. This is the pickerel frog. You ever heard of a pickerel frog?
It's actually pronounced walleye frog.
It's not actually. So the pickerel frog, I'm sure you've seen a brown leopard frog.
Yeah.
There's a good chance that was a pickerel frog.
Interesting.
So there are brown leopard frogs. They have round spots. The pickerel frog have a little bit more uniform patterning on their spots in their back, and they're more squared off on their spots. They look quite similar to a brown leopard frog if you want to picture it, though. Little fun fact about the pickerel frog, it's poisonous.
For humans?
Yeah.
So don't eat a pickerel frog.
It's not deadly poisonous, but it does have a poison where if it's in an open wound or you touch your eye after handling the frog, it will cause you some discomfort for sure. So that's actually one of the only poisonous frogs we have in Canada.
So if you are a girl out there looking to find your prince, was it a girl that kissed a guy frog and it turned into a...
I think a handsome prince.
Yeah, so if you're a chick out there and you're trying to find a guy and you pick up one of these pickerel frogs, don't kiss it. It'll make you throw up, and it won't turn into a handsome guy.
If you're gonna kiss some brown, a spotted frog, make sure it's green, not brown. That's
See, I told you
Pro
learned
tips.
something today.
So the pickerel frog, going back to hibernation, it can hibernate underwater like most other frogs. It also has another one where it will choose a hibernaculum, fancy word again, in a cave or in a cavernous area. So that's oftentimes near the bank of water. And in the middle of winter, they'll be hibernating and they'll be under leaves. But because of the cave's kind of atmosphere, it still stays between that 0 to 4 degrees Celsius temperature range. That's what they still need to find that, but they will source that if there's a cavernous area. And if you can find, or if they find an area like that, oftentimes there's many of these pickerel frogs that will hibernate in the same cave. Not technically with each other, they just have their hibernaculums very close to each other. They'll also be found in caves in very hot summer months, again, for its insulating properties. Now the third hibernation method is done by the wood frog and 3 other species of frog, the 3 tree frogs that we have in Ontario: the gray tree frog, the spring peeper, and the chorus frog. Now, you already said this. They freeze solid, right?
Yeah.
Do you know how they do that?
I assume they just stand out in the cold and freeze solid. I don't know.
So freezing solid isn't the cool part. The cool part is they come back to life.
Yes.
And not as zombies, as real back, fully operational frogs.
Walt Disney style.
Yeah. So wood frogs specifically, they can be found as far north as Alaska.
Wow.
And that's because they're able to do this. So they hibernate not underwater, not in a cave, just under leaf litter or under the bark of a tree. So it's going to reach sub-zero temperatures. What they do is that when the temperatures are as low as -5 degrees, tiny ice crystals form in the body. Now normally when water freezes that's in something's body, it will actually crystallize, and it basically makes little ice knives that are shredding through the cells because all this water is retained in the cells themselves. And it will just shred them apart, and then when they thaw, the cells can't operate at all because they've been sliced to bits. So what they do is they have they can freeze up to 70% of the water in their body. Like, how can you decide, like, oh, I'm going to only decide to freeze 70%, not the whole 100? So what they do is they have they release glycogen from their liver and large quantities of glucose. So what this does is
It's
it
like
actually
antifreeze.
Yeah, it creates antifreeze. So it will hold enough moisture in the cells and keep them liquid, all that water. It'll release other moisture from the cells that can freeze, but it freezes in smaller crystalline structures. So the liquid that's still within their cells will remain liquid the whole time, but it's so minuscule. So these compounds, they allow the correct amount of water to be removed from each cell, keeps the remaining water in a liquid state within the cells. And then as well, they protect the cells from dying due to lack of oxygen. Because you think of this, if they freeze solid, everything stops. Their blood stops pumping. Their heart stops going. There's nothing to carry oxygen to these cells to keep them alive.
Yeah.
So they'll be frozen for months at a time. Like literally like 6 months they can stay frozen. And as long as they don't dip below, as long as their core temperature doesn't dip below -6 degrees Celsius, they're okay. So the scientists still don't understand what happens exactly, how they come back to life. But when they start to thaw, the first area that thaws, that heats up, is their heart. And the heart starts pumping again. Then the brain starts to warm up. Once the brain is warm and the blood is now circulating through the body, every other part of that frog, all of its organs, all of its limbs, reanimate, and now it's hopping away happily.
I wish I could do that.
That would save our hypothermia victims.
Yeah, like we discussed last week.
So I thought it was pretty cool that there are like 3 different methods for hibernating that the frogs use. But one that has been my favorite for years was the wood frog specifically.
Yeah.
And how can you just freeze solid? That's crazy.
That is cool. Very interesting. And
like
it's no loon fact, but
I like frogs. Oh, okay, Frog Nation people out there, people like frogs. Message and tell me if you like the frogs and if you want more facts. Because that's one aspect of it.
You know what eats frogs? Loons.
You know what else eat frogs? Bass.
Bass eats frogs.
And if you're listening to this podcast, you like that too.
Yes. We're not talking about the imitation guitar that people that can't play guitar play. Just kidding.
Hey, that's my instrument.
I'll give you a solid B+.5 for that. I think that's pretty good. Okay. B++.
Okay.
Accept that. It was good. Okay. So, before we get into the main topic, I have something to show Andrew. So we got a package today in the mail, and Andrew does not know what it is. In fact, I did not know what it was until I opened it. Listen to this.
Thank goodness it wasn't anthrax. It's a lure. It's a hard bait.
Yeah. Now, this is something that I was telling to Andrew. This is something that I actually wanted to get before, and I didn't get it. And then this came in the mail, and I was super happy. So I'm going to show one to Andrew. Close your eyes. Close your eyes. Keep them closed. All right. So we keep them closed. So we actually we were on a podcast a few weeks ago, and I'm going to leave the link down below in the description. We're actually happy enough to be on the Len Thompson podcast. I would definitely recommend listening to their podcast. It's a good one. And there was one episode that we were interviewed on it. So definitely check that one out. And for a little thank you for being on their podcast, Brad and Jess from Len Thompson sent us a little gift, Andrew. Open your eyes.
I'm looking at the back of it, so you'll get to see it here. Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. So that
is awesome.
They sent us a bunch of their classic Len Thompson spoons.
I love that.
Yeah.
That one's amazing.
They sent us a few spoons, so we have a few each. And they
yellow with green.
They have, this is their custom fishing lure series. So you can actually get your own logo or phrase or whatever printed on to one of the classic Len Thompson lures. And yeah, Jess and Brad, they actually printed our Average Ontario Anglers loon, not a frog logo, a loon logo right on the front of these spoons. So that's a cool little gift. We really appreciate that. That's super cool.
Message us if you think in the summertime it should be a frog, but in the wintertime it should be a loon.
Yeah, definitely not. Anyway. We got a few of these. I'm probably going to keep one as like a keychain, but I'm going to actually try to catch fish on the other ones.
I love it.
Yeah, they're so nice, but I do want to catch a fish on one of these. Yeah, so they did send us a few of them in different colors. So yeah, I'll post some pictures of that on our social media. So I thought that was pretty cool.
I want to hold on to this one.
It's super cool to be able to make friends with different brands and companies that have been, making lures and, doing different things in the fishing industry for decades. So we're really we're privileged to have had that experience. So that's really cool. So
That's
definitely,
awesome.
we'll
Thank
leave
you very
that in
much,
the
Len
show
Thompson.
notes. So you can definitely listen to that episode and subscribe to their podcast as well.
That was a fun podcast to do with them too.
Yeah, it was. They actually had their way that they did their podcast. It was all like, it was scripted well. Like they were like,
Yeah.
okay, now we're gonna do this, and then they had a little game we played. It was pretty fun. Not like this podcast. This podcast isn't fun at all, right, Andrew?
It's a chore.
Now, if anyone can guess what this sound is, oh yeah, it's a brand new Tim Hortons coffee. Let's see how it tastes. Oh, it's burnt as usual. Anyway, we're gonna get to our main topic now. So this topic, as we mentioned before, is 5 ways to be a better angler. I don't think there's a fisherman or angler in the world that can say truly deep down that they know everything about fishing. Maybe Jeremy Wade, but even he will
knows
probably
everything
tell you.
about fishing river monsters. But
Yes.
not everything about fishing.
Now, I know there's probably some cocky people out there that are like, I know everything about fishing and blah, blah, blah. But that's false. You don't. I like to think of musky guys. You watch these musky guys on YouTube, guys that are legit guides that are fishing, 6-7 days a week. And they'll tell you every once in a while, they're like, I have no idea what these fish are doing. Absolutely no clue. And these guys they're hammers. They catch massive fish, and yet they're constantly learning. So I think that's one of the big things is you can never stop learning as an angler. You're going to be going out there, and how many days, again, some people will probably be like, I catch fish every single time I go out. I doubt it, for one. For two, you're probably not catching fish that are challenging enough if that's the case.
Yeah.
But I feel like in general, every single person, at least a few times a year, you're either going to get skunked or you're just going to have a day that was just mediocre. And
See, now I'm one of the guys where I can almost say every time I go out, I catch a fish. Because I will at some point, if I'm getting skunked, go for sunfish.
yeah, exactly.
So yes, it may sound impressive. However, when you actually see my results, not so much.
Thanks, Mario. So I thought we could just go over this point about never stop learning. And it depends per person, right? Because I remember when me and Andrew were growing up, I used to get the Bass Pro Shops catalog in the mail.
Yep.
From
Big
US.
thick book.
Yeah, because back then there wasn't a Bass Pro Shops in Canada.
Yeah.
And we used to memorize everything in the catalog. I'd be like, Andrew, turn to page 59, check out this lure. And he'd be like, I already know which one you're talking about. We used to like
Did you
soak
see
up.
St. Croix's new rod that's out?
Yeah. We used to soak up all the information we possibly could. All the fishing magazines, like YouTube wasn't really a thing when we were growing up. So we used to have to, Outdoor Canada, Ontario Out of Doors, Field and Stream.
I subscribed to
In Fisherman.
Ontario Out of Doors. My parents did office cleaning, and one of the offices was a magazine distributing place. And that's where I would keep up to date on all of the, was it Fish in Canada? No, what's the...
Outdoor Canada?
Outdoor Canada.
Yeah.
I read the Outdoor Canada's there. And then when I was old enough, I would sometimes go to the library in town and up in Beaverton. And you could sometimes see like In Fisherman and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I loved In Fisherman. It was more technical than some of the other like Ontario ones. And then we used to watch, fishing shows on TV. Back in the day, it was Bob Azumi.
Yeah.
It was the Fishing Canada show. Angelo Viola, Pete Bowman, Reno Viola, right? And then you had the Real Canadian
Real
Sport
Fishing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With Italo. And that was pretty much it. There wasn't a lot, but now there's such a
Yeah.
wealth of knowledge. You
used
can learn
to-
so much.
Now half of our listeners probably won't understand this, but I used to retape the Saturday morning stuff because we always went cleaning Saturday, so I never got to stay home and watch the fishing shows. So I would set up the VHS recorder and I would tape like whatever, and then my dad was like, you can have this one tape. So I would have to watch them all before the next week so that I could retape over it to watch the next week's shows.
Yeah. I used to do that too. We used to tape over. My grandma would do it for me. So we used to just, at that time, that was what we had. And we used to try to just soak up all the information that we could. But fast forward to 2023, you have YouTube.
It's all on YouTube, baby.
It's all on YouTube University, right? You can learn so much on YouTube. And you know what? I always hear from some guys, some older guys especially, they'll be like, I learned how to fish the real way, time on the water, and I didn't learn from YouTube or any stupid things like that. It's like, I'm sorry that you had to do it the hard way. Life is too short to take the long way to do anything. If you can learn how to do something in a week instead of 5 years, do it in a week.
Yeah.
So definitely.
And you're not, and that's the side point to that too, is it also will take you on the water, because you can read books and you can watch videos and be told by people what to do. And until you're out in the water, like for example, fishing tubes for muskie, like we've heard for a long time that tubes for muskie work really well.
Yeah.
You went fishing with Bobby and you learned how to fish a tube. Like it took you being on the water to see that. And then you put it into practice, you figured it out yourself then. And now you've got 2 muskie in a tube. But like I said, it's you can have that wealth of information so that now when you're on the water, you can minimize the amount of time you're trying to learn stuff. You're like, okay, I already have an idea, and now I'm going to put this into practice.
Yeah. So say tubes is a perfect example, because how to fish a tube, there's a specific way generally to fish it. Like there's many ways to fish it, but there's some things that you shouldn't do with the tube. Like you shouldn't overwork it or fish it too hard. Or fish it like any other rubber bait where you're just, reeling and jerking the rod really hard. You don't want to do that. So I did research. I watched some videos on YouTube, guys that are guides fishing tubes. Here's how you do it. I talked to some guys online, like Corey from Slump Bus Outdoors. I was asking him, like, how do you fish a tube? Like I've had a few follows, but nothing grabbed, right? So he's giving me some tips. And then, I had, I was fortunate enough to fish with a guide who fishes for muskie. And he was like, yeah, here, check a tube. This is what you do. And by that, he put me in front of some fish. I knew what I was doing. I cast out. I caught a muskie. Like it happens, right?
Yeah.
All that trial and error, you don't have to do at that point. You still have to spend time on the water. But if you already have the basics of fishing down, learning a new technique isn't going to take you forever. You just have to get the basics down and then just go out and fish. And like Andrew said, you still have to put time on the water. You can't just watch YouTube and be like, well, I know how to fish a tube now. It's like,
your first cast out, you're still not going to work it properly.
Yeah.
But you have cut out perhaps days on the water or weeks in the water, getting rid of all the bad habits you would have picked up.
Exactly. Yeah. So there's so many ways to learn. And again, like we said, YouTube, fishing with more experienced anglers, time on the water is big. Even if
our podcast.
Yeah, our podcast is okay. But never stop learning. Always be looking to do better and learn something more. And that's basically what the next 2 points are about. They're ways that you can learn to do better in your fishing. And for most of us, let's just say the majority, if you're listening to this, you can probably go out and catch fish. Mm-hmm. No problem. Like you go out every year, you catch fish, but maybe you have, a goal. You're like, I want to catch a big bass, or I want to catch a big walleye. I want to do this. And it's not something you particularly know how to do just because, circumstances. Like for instance, like me and Andrew don't walleye fish a lot. We don't. We've caught walleye over the years. We've caught some big ones over the years, but we're not pros at walleye fishing. That's why we don't talk about it a lot. So we're learning. We're slowly learning how to do it better. Mm-hmm. And that's how we get better at it. You're never going to get better at something by not doing it, So if we're giving you walleye tips, don't listen to them yet. Just kidding. So I thought that...
Didn't we do an episode on that?
No, we didn't. Specifically, people are like, can you guys do a walleye trolling episode? I was like, well, we've never done that before, so no. So anyway, I thought this point
it's
coming
called
up...
an eerie deary. And all you do...
Point number 2 is understanding fish behavior and movement. Now, Andrew, why is that such a big deal? Like, because I know this is something we have learned a lot in the last 2 years.
Yes. So understanding their behavior and movement is huge. If you are fishing dead water where there's no fish in it, that's absolute waste of time on the water. So if you can, figure out where they're going to be, where they're most likely, I will say, where they're most likely going to be during certain seasons, during different weather patterns, you can save so much time and save that trip, because it might be a struggle to find them. But if you put what you've learned into practice, it's been a tough trip like we've had all year. And it's like, oh, you know what? Cold front moved in. I know they're not going to be super shallow. They should be deeper. Maybe they're going to be moving down. Maybe they haven't reached the deep water yet in the fall. Maybe they're going to be kind of, pushed against these rock walls. They're going to be on top of this type of structure because it retains more heat. All these things, and we'll go out and we're not catching anything, but we're trying all these different spots till we find what's working. Yeah. And because we know that we have to try these areas that are most promising, that can save a fishing trip. Make you're going home skunked, or you can catch potentially your personal best.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people, what they do, inexperienced anglers, and some people, they just want to go out and catch fish. Mm-hmm. They're not going to be like, I don't want to do all the homework. I just want to go out and cast a whopper plopper and catch a bass. That's fine. But if you want to become a better angler, like Andrew said, you have to find where the fish are supposed to be at certain times of the year. So for instance, for bass, think of the year for bass in Ontario. Anyway, we have a bass season, obviously. So like you can't start fishing till the end of June. And at that point in time, you're not fishing deep water. Those bass are still generally relating to shallow water. Now, if you do a little homework, you can figure that out. Okay. But as the year goes by and it starts getting hotter, a lot of those fish will actually move a bit deeper, you know? Again, there's always going to be fish in shallow water. We always say that, but you will start seeing fish in slightly deeper water. And then in that period in the fall, remember, they shoot back up shallow again.
Yep.
And then as soon as it starts getting colder again, they go a bit deeper. So like that movement of fish, it's different from fish to fish. It's very similar, I find, with a lot of the species in Ontario. But with that movement, you're saving so much time. You could be literally, I've seen people fishing in like shallow, like dead lily pads in like October.
Yeah.
And they're throwing frogs. I'm like, you're not going to catch anything.
And the thing is, too, you have another species, like think about pike. If you could have, let's say you're going for pike and all summer long, yeah, you can catch a bunch of pike in a day fishing shallow weeds. Absolutely. You will catch a bunch of 20 to 24 inch pike. But if you want to catch that one, if your goal is, I want to catch a 30, I want to catch, a 40, then you have to recognize those fish aren't going to be in the shallow. So even breaking it down, not just by species, but what is your goal to catch? What are you trying to do? Challenge yourself. If your goal is to catch a bigger pike, they're going to be in colder water. They're cold water fish. So now you have to focus around river mouths. You got to focus deeper water, drop offs. You got to focus on, underwater springs. If you happen to know where one of those is, let me know.
Yeah.
But even with that, like the size of the fish may determine where it's located, even if it's the same species as other things you already caught.
Yeah. And the second point of that, so that's definitely fish movement. And the first point of that is understanding fish behavior, which is similar. So like you have to learn, one thing that really helped me catch more fish is understanding how fish behave in different types of weather.
Yeah.
That is a huge one, because I know a lot of people will be like, you know what? Yeah, I was fishing a frog, man, and I couldn't get them to bite. And I was like, well, what did you flip? Did you punch? No, I just fished a frog. They were bulging on it, but not coming up. It's like they were telling you they didn't want it. That's why they weren't blowing it. If a bass wants to eat a frog, there's no stopping him. He's going to fit it in his mouth somehow. If you're casting and they're not hitting it, it means that something's wrong. They don't want it. They want something else. So I have to understand sometimes that fish they'll tell you what they want, and you have to be able to adapt. You're fishing a frog, they're not hitting. What do? You flip. You're going to punch something in, something slower, maybe something smaller. There's days when me and Andrew go out and I'm fishing a standard size frog and I'm getting boils on it, nothing. And Andrew will throw out a finesse frog, like a little tiny micro weedless frog. He'll whip it out, twitch it once, and a bass will blow up and eat it.
Yep. And
that is the fish telling you they want something smaller for whatever reason. You have to learn to adapt to that. And that's with any species. Sometimes fish, it's always funny when people are like, well, this is what the fish should be doing. And it's like, well, fish don't read those magazines. Fish are going to do what they want.
They didn't see the same TV show you saw.
Yeah. So, I mean, those are general guidelines, which are great to know. But fish don't follow those rules all the time. So you have to be able to understand fish behavior and also understand that fish behave weirdly.
Yeah.
And sometimes you just have to adapt.
And another thing, too, with talking about presentations and how they react, if there are some days when a nice finesse or subtle, really natural presentation works well, and that's because the fish, they might be feeling pressured, nice calm day, they can really kind of examine what they're eating, and that's a great time to use those things. But there are times when, like, I love that type of fishing, and then there's other times where they want to chase, they want to be active. And I'll be trying that, and I will not be catching stuff. And there's Jesse casting this hot pink spinner bait with like a giant white curly that looks like nothing at all, ripping it across, and he's nailing fish after fish. With stuff like that, like you look at how fish, certain ones are more prone to reaction strikes than others.
Yeah.
Depending on the time of year, the weather, that can all change. Even within that, again, within the species, you can have different days. It's better for both. So learning when it's best to use either of those techniques. Like, those are two very broad ones, either side of the spectrum, really. But again, that's why Jesse and I, when we fish together, we have different fishing styles already of our preferences. So we can usually dial it in pretty quick as to which ones are working.
We're usually not fishing the same technique at once, generally. So we can find and pattern the fish easier. So to wrap up this point number 2 in a nutshell, understand fish behavior and movement. There's lots of information out there. Again, YouTube, look up the videos on YouTube. There's lots of, professionals, guides, fish biologists out there that have YouTube channels that are fantastic. And they will basically tell you like, hey, you're fishing fall, the water's getting cold, this is where bass go. There's lots of information. You just have to sit and watch it.
Look up scientific information about, like, they've tagged fish and they're looking at their movements through the year. Like, it's going to be a boring read, absolutely, but you could learn a whole lot that could help you on the water.
Yeah. So with fish movement and behavior, once you learn or get a grasp on it, because I don't think you could ever learn those two things completely.
If you could, there would be one guy who always wins Bassmaster.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen. There's some guys like Kevin Van Dam, the GOAT. He understands a lot, but if he understood it all, he'd still be winning.
Yeah. And just to reiterate the point that understanding fish behavior and movement is important, think of the guys that fish the Elite Series bass tournaments or any tournament around here. The guys that do well are guys that understand fish behavior and movement, okay? When you fish the bass tournaments in the States, sometimes you're fishing lakes that you've never fished before. How do you catch fish on a lake that you've never fished before, and oftentimes catch bigger and more fish than the locals that have lived there their whole life? It's because, well, you probably have really good raw talent, but on top of that, you understand.
And live scope.
Yeah. Live scope aside.
Just kidding.
They do well on these new bodies of water and outfish people because they understand fish behavior and movement. They go there. They know where to look. They know what the fish are doing. They know that, hey, it's cloudy. I'm going to chuck something that has, painted blades instead of silver. Like, they know all that stuff from trial and error, and they learn that stuff. That's what helps them be successful. So the next point I thought is really good because it's something that I've really been trying to work on a lot because I'm a gear junkie. And point number 3 is, I think you'll be a better angler if you focus less on fishing gear and more on presentation. So it's so easy to get caught up in like, oh, the new reel came out or the new rod
Fishing stores are fun to look around and buy stuff at. It's great.
And I'm sure most of us...
part of the hobby and part of the love of the hobby is that.
Especially if you're a multi-species angler, you'll have so many rods and reels. Like, you'll have musky rods, you'll have, sunfish, like, or panfish rods, ice fishing rods, trout rods, walleye rods, it's crazy. Like,
it becomes endless because now it's like, here's my bass rod. But now it's my bass rod for frogging. Now it's for flipping. Now it's for chatterbaits. Now it's for crankbaits. Now it's
and that's one thing I think for a long time, Andrew only had a few rods. And he started fishing with me, and I was like, how are you going to fish that frog with a medium spinning rod and 10-pound line? And he's like, I'll do it. And he caught fish, but he quickly realized that you need a specific heavier rod for that application. But it's so easy to buy expensive gear. And I'm not saying you can't buy different rods for different applications. That's perfectly fine. But the point of this is focus less on gear, meaning don't think you have to have expensive gear to catch fish. And I got caught up in that. I'd be watching all this YouTube video and I'd be like, okay, I'm looking for a good jig rod. I'm a bit of a, I like a nice rod. I'm not one of those guys that's fishing like, G Loomis NRX pluses and stuff, but I like to spend, I have no problem spending, $300-400 on a bass rod, no problem. But it got to the point where I'm like, you watch all these reviews and there's people that are like, oh yeah, well, if you need sensitivity, you need this $800 mega bass rod, or these rods aren't sensitive. And you pick up a $300 rod on their videos and they're just like, like this isn't sensitive at all. And it's like, it's all comparative, right?
It's like, I've been fishing an ugly stick. This thing is crisp. Like,
yeah. I always tell people when I worked at the tackle shop and they're going to pick up the, G Loomis stuff, I'd be like, don't touch it.
Yeah.
If you touch that and you pick it up, it'll ruin you for everything else. If you're not prepared for that, do not touch it.
It's like drinking a really good like whiskey or something, and then everything else after tastes like piss.
So I made that mistake with float fishing. I bought a G Loomis GLX float rod. Beautiful rod. One of the lightest rods you can pick up. Ruined me for all other float rods. And every other float rod I pick up, I'm like, wow, this is heavy. Am I holding like a bamboo pole? But that's the thing is you don't need an expensive float rod to catch fish. You're not feeling bites. The only thing that's better is it's lighter to hold. It's crisp. It's nice. But for fighting fish, for just fishing in general, it's not necessary. And I think a lot of people get caught up in that, oh, you need this expensive rod or else you will not feel bites. It's like, if you can't feel a bite, they were feeling bites on fiberglass rods and 30-pound monofilament back in the day flipping in the weeds. You can feel a bite on a $100 rod with braided line. Believe me.
The other thing too is you have, like, we're talking about tackle as well. Yes, you don't need to have the most expensive tackle, but if you ask Jesse and I'm pretty sure going to be the same mind. If you're like, here's $150 and you need to buy everything. You need to buy a rod, a reel, and some tackle, and you need to have a contest to see if you can catch fish or whatever. I tell you right now, I'm buying the cheapest rod and reel I can find and putting the rest on like a good quality jerkbait and, you know, some jigs and like a good plastic bait, because I know that I can use a low end rod and reel, but if my bait is going to be looking good in the water, and again, you don't have to use like super high end baits either. If you get a round jig head and a twister tail, but you're fishing that effectively, you'll catch fish.
Yeah.
So for me, I would be putting as little money as I could into a functional rod and reel, and the rest on the equipment that will help me have a better presentation.
Yeah. Rods have come a long way in the last, I'd say even the last 5 years, but really in the last 10, 15 years. Like when we started buying gear, and we're not even that old, we're in our 30s or early 30s, but like when we started buying gear, for $100, the rods you got now for $100 are insane. They like the $100 rods now were like the $200 rods back then.
Yeah.
It's crazy. So like,
remember like IM6 graphite.
Yeah.
Like, whoa, this is amazing.
So sensitive.
And now it's like, those are crankbait rods now.
Yeah, those are garbage. But for instance, I have a lot of rods I've picked up over the years. I probably have 40, 50 rods. Andrew will tell you. Yeah, it's too many. But I more collect them. I understand that it's a bit excessive. But I'll tell you, I was talking to a guy, and we were talking about the Daiwa Tatula XT rods. No affiliation with Daiwa. Those are the best rod under $150. Yeah. Those are the best rods under $150. I don't care what rod you bring up. That one's better. I guarantee it. And I've used a ton of rods, and I worked at a tackle shop. Like, come on. They're sleek. They look like they cost $200. They've got black high density foam handles, sleek black.
I legit want to get one next year because
really crisp.
They're awesome.
They're $120.
Yeah.
I got mine on sale for $99 at one of the sales at Gagnon Sports. I picked up that rod just on a whim. I already had the same model and a higher end rod. And I'm not joking. I use that rod more because I'm not afraid to break it. Yep. And I think that's huge for me, because if you fish in a canoe, a kayak, or a tinner boat, and you're banging around in the water and you have a $400 jig rod there, you're like, oh, that thing just banging against the side of the boat.
So your enjoyability is higher because you can just use it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, granted, if you hold that rod beside a nice like Loomis or high-end St. Croix and you're like, okay, this rod's heavier and it's not as sensitive, that is true. But this $120 rod is sensitive enough to catch fish.
Yep.
And it's $120. So if you break it, who cares? So I would say, like, I used to say that I would buy rods between $200 and $300. That was like my sweet spot was like $250. I've had a lot of the St. Croix Victory rods, but I will tell you, they're great rods.
Yeah.
I broke 2 of them.
Yeah.
Okay. Was it my fault? Probably. But I'll tell you, the rods that I've had that are $100, $150, Daiwa and some other companies, haven't broke any of them.
Yeah.
They're great rods. They're built slightly tougher. They're still sensitive. They're only $100, $150. They're fantastic. Think of the Mojo Muskie or the Mojo Bass series from St. Croix.
I'm still on the first edition one.
They're fantastic rods. They're $160, $170, $180 probably now, but they're less than $200. Those rods are sensitive. They're made with the same graphite as their higher end rods.
Yep.
They have a 5-year fantastic warranty. Why do you need something better than that?
Yeah.
Just think.
And again, like you say,
we're talking
it's
about
the same blank as the higher end rod.
As an average angler, I get it. If you're making money, fishing, if you're a guide or you fish tournaments or you just like having bougie gear. We're not saying you can't have bougie gear. What I'm saying is you don't have to think that you need bougie gear to catch fish.
Yeah.
If I have a $100 Daiwa rod, a $100 Daiwa reel with some braided line, I can go out and use anything and catch fish. And I have full confidence. Like sometimes I'll be fishing and I have a bunch of nice combos in the boat. Usually my combos are like $300 rod, $300 reel. You're looking at $500, $600 combos, and you have multiple combos. And then you have your cheaper combos, which are $100 rods and maybe like $150 reels, right?
Yep.
So it's not even that much. It's like $250. I know that may sound a lot to a lot of people, but those combos, if you're fishing them, you don't realize that they're less expensive combos.
Yeah.
You're just fishing and having fun. So don't worry about, it's only a $100 rod. It doesn't matter, literally.
Yeah. We have we have gear where when we bring it in my boat, our fishing tackle and rods and gear, costs way more than what my boat costs.
Oh,
the
100%.
entirety of the boat and trailer altogether and motor
Yep.
cost way less than the amount of gear we just brought on board, excluding electronics. Like that's not including the electronics you bring when we go fishing.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I've gone out fishing with guys and they have this rod they've been using for 15 years that they got at Canadian Tire, and they're going to catch just as many fish as me that day.
Exactly.
Like it's like it doesn't require, like exactly what you said. You don't need the most expensive stuff to have fun in the water, to catch good fish. And what do you often find? The guy, fishing the pier, the guy that's going to catch that salmon isn't the guy with that $1,200 center pin. It's this guy using like this giant like shore casting combo for like saltwater, and he's like, "Oh, I caught a salmon." Like, okay.
I always say the fish don't care what you're holding in your hands because they can't see it.
Yeah.
They don't care. Now, like I said, we're not saying you can't use expensive gear, and here are some pros of using more expensive gear, because I know a lot of people, especially people that aren't gear snobs, they'll tell you like, "Oh, you don't need that $500, blah, blah, blah." Sometimes higher end gear is justified. I'm going to ask Andrew a few questions. Just answer yes or no. Okay. Generally, can you cast more accurately with a more expensive rod?
Absolutely.
Exactly. Generally, can you feel more bites on a more expensive rod?
Yes.
Okay. So right there's two advantages. Now, if you're like skipping baits under docks and you're using a less expensive whippy rod, can you get it under a dock? Absolutely. Will it take way more effort and you'll have less accuracy? Absolutely.
Yeah.
So there are advantages of using rods that are specifically designed for a certain thing. If you're drop shotting in 25 feet of water on waves on lakes or on Lake St. Clair or something like that, or like the St. Lawrence, one of those super sensitive high end finesse drop shot rods is going to help you catch more fish because you will feel more bites. But we're talking about the average angler, you can get away with less expensive gear. I know that was a big rant, but like it's something that I've gone through. Like I have rods that from all the way from $50 all the way up to $800 for rods, right? And I've come to the conclusion over the years, and especially the last 2 years, some of my favorite rods are under $150. And I've caught just as many fish. Remember that walleye trip we went on?
Yeah.
I had two spinning combos. One was a St. Croix Victory, which is like, $270 rod plus tax. So you're looking $300 plus bucks, and a high-end Shimano on it. And my other combo, so that was like a $500 combo at least. My other combo was that Daiwa XT 7-foot medium light, which is $120, and I had a Daiwa Fuego spinning reel, $120. That lower price Daiwa combo, I just had the snap jig on that the fish are grabbing, and I didn't even think to even pick up the other rod because I was just having too much fun using that rod. I had no problems feeling bites on jigs. Like it was great. So like you don't need high end gear. And again, by all means, if you can afford high end gear and you like it, go for it. I love it too, but you have to understand it's not necessary.
For a long time, my stream trout combo was an old Mitchell, like I think it was $60. This old spinning reel, this small spinning reel, and I had there's a guy actually, he does rod repair, and so I said I'm looking for a trout rod, but I didn't have any money at the time. So since he does rod repair, he has a bunch of like random stuff. So he took the top end of a float rod and then just stuck it on the butt of this old like piece of junk, like Shakespeare or whatever. And he's like, "Here you go," and he just made this rod, just married it up, and now it's like a 2-piece, but the bottom piece is like 1.5 feet and the top piece is 6 feet long. But that's what I fished for. I still have that rod. I actually really like that rod.
Yeah,
it's a nice, really light action trout rod, and that's what I was using. And the rod was free. This guy obviously put some time into it, but he's like, "Yeah, it's like $50. Like it's from broken material."
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
So for him, it was nothing to make that up. But again, it's not a high end rod by any means. It didn't even begin that way. I think it was a streamside blank to begin with.
Yeah,
and just this super cheap reel that's 5 years old at the time, and that's what I used for the longest time. And I could still catch fish. We would go fishing together in for stream trout, and it didn't matter what we were holding. Like you said, didn't matter what you were holding. You had to get your worm down into that hole. That's it.
Yeah, exactly. Back in the day, people would use, like, I remember fishing with my grandpa back in the day, and we just had like cane poles. Like he would just have a pole, and then put some line on it. Boom, you catch fish. It doesn't matter. Anyway, that's a long rant for that one, but it's something that I feel very strongly about because I see a lot of people get sucked into that, where they're just like, you know what, they sort of get like brainwashed by the media. And you have to think, when you're watching YouTube, you have these anglers that are sponsored by companies. They're basically salesmen. Nothing against them. They got to make their money somehow. That's what they do for a job. But they're pushing their product. They make it seem like you need that. It's like that in every industry. Like, you need this to catch fish. Oh, this new bait. You won't catch fish unless you use this bait. It's all BS. You can go out and, like Andrew said, put on a twister tail on an ugly stick and go out and catch fish.
I don't know if we can call ourselves a clean podcast if we just use short forms.
Hey, I didn't say it. Still clean. Anyway, we're going to go to our next point, and this is a cool one too. Learn to find fishing spots. Now, one way to become a better angler is to fish better water, and unfortunately, a lot of the water around a lot of people is hammered.
Yep.
Lots of fishing pressure. So one way that we've caught more fish is we find fishing spots. Now, I've had a lot of people ask, how do you do this? How do you find crown land? How do you find these lakes full of fish? How do we do it, Andrew? Don't give out too many details.
Two of the main ways. Crown land is just Google how to find crown land, and the Ontario Crown Land website will show up. Yeah. And you can search it that way. There are some other apps, like do a bit of research on finding other apps that you can download maps for crown land, and then it shows you where to go. But in general, I'll look at Google Earth.
Yep.
Like Google Maps, put it on satellite mode, and then I'll look for bodies of water that might be close by. It could be a pond, but I'll see if it, a creek goes through it. And okay, it's not a stormwater pond. That's just a big pool essentially. And I'll go fish it, or we'll look for maybe it could just be a small lake on the side of the road, but we'll look for what access we could find where we can launch. And you have to go and you try it, and it could be a complete bust. It could be nothing there.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's the one time we first fish we caught there was like a 4.5 pound largemouth.
Yeah. So for example, considering that pond, we had driven by this pond many times, and Andrew every time was like, I want to fish that pond. And I was like, you know what? It's right off the highway. There's no way to get there.
Yeah.
I was like, don't worry about it. It's a small pond anyway, And every time we drove by, I was like, you know what? That looks really good. I looked out on Google Maps, and I think we can get through there. And it was like, there was no road to get to it or anything. It was just the middle of nowhere. And one day we're like, you know what? I think we were on the way home from another trip. I was like, we have a few hours to kill. Let's just go. We'll carry the canoe in. So we found a way there. We had to walk the canoe in. It was a pain in the butt.
Yep.
We got to the pond. We slid, it was still using Andrew's canoe at the time. We slid it in the pond. Within 5 minutes, we had a 4.5 pound largemouth.
Yeah.
That day we caught, I think, 8 fish over 3 pounds in this little pond the size of a soccer field. And I think it was an abandoned farm pond that was stocked with bass.
Yeah.
And we caught giant fish and crappie.
There's crappie in it too.
Yeah, it was a fantastic pond. Now there's nothing in it. I think other people found it, which is another reason why a lot of people are tight-lipped.
Yeah.
But at that time, I think we had 2 or 3 trips there where we did very well and caught several fish over 4 pounds in a small pond where you could see cars driving by on the highway.
Yeah.
It was crazy. So use Google Maps, like Andrew said. Another way you can find spots is just exploring. Mm-hmm. Like say you're up camping or you're up at someone's friend's house, look at Google Maps. You have to just drive around sometimes and find out. Sometimes in Google Maps, you'll look and you'll be like, oh, this looks good. And you'll get there and you'll be like, it's absolute trash. It's like 3 inches deep. So sometimes you just have to drive around and look.
Yeah, we were actually camping up north. Another one, like Jesse said, explore a little bit. So we were camping. We've done this a few times where we'll, like, especially me, I'll push it to, hey, let's go try that. Because you'll see oftentimes you're camping on a lake. It could be in a provincial park, it could be Crown Land, could be wherever.
Yeah.
And it could be, a place where you consistently go with, on an annual holiday. But then you'll see, there's a little creek that comes out of this big flooded, like beaver dammed up area. And it makes this huge pond or kind of small lake off to the side. And I'm the kind of guy, I want to catch a fish in that place just because it's a cool place to catch a fish.
Yeah.
So I always push, let's go, let's do it. And there have been times, most of the time, nothing happens. We go there and it's like, I can see why nothing's here because it's all just scummy. But there's another spot that I had been camping a long time on this lake. And I'm like, Jesse, I know I've done fishing from shore. And if we push over this little slot of land, we can get into this back bay area that's been cut off for hundreds of years. And we push over top, and that was the best fishing of the trip.
It was.
Like when we fish there, that's where we catch our best fish.
And I'm pretty sure most of those fish we caught had never been caught before in their life.
Because no one, and this is an accessible lake, I'll say that. I'm not going to say where it is, but it's an accessible lake. And it gets fished, not hammered, but it gets fished quite often.
Yeah.
And
by bigger boats.
Yeah. And so to be able to have this spot where we can drop the canoe in, and that's the other thing. If you are an average guy, chances are you might not have a big bass boat and you have a small one. Use that to your advantage.
Yes.
So if you're like, hey, I can push over that, I can jump that beaver dam, I can portage around, I can go somewhere that doesn't have a boat launch, fish those spots that like you can have a blast. Even if it's just the day and you don't catch anything, you explored a new body of water, you're going to enjoy your time. You're going to see little kingfishers like, flying by. You're going to have birds around you. It's going to be a nice little time out in nature. Even if you don't catch anything, it'll be a nice exploratory trip.
Yeah, and like you said, if you are a small craft angler or a shore angler, if you put that extra steps in when you're walking or hiking, walk the extra mile. You know what I mean? Like paddle the extra mile, go the extra, few miles down a dirt road. The farther and harder it is to get to a spot, the better it is. The better it is for fishing. Any spot that's easy to fish is hammered. There's a few local spots around us with shore angling, and it's so easy. You park and you can fish right there. There's always people there. The odds of you catching fish there is very low. There's not, they get fished out very quickly. But if you have to...
And you'll hear everyone who fishes there, oh yeah, I've caught lots of fish here, but it's because they fish it every single day, or they've been fishing it since they were 12.
Yeah.
It's like, you've caught lots of fish over the years and you're remembering the best times.
Yeah. And I would say the last way to find fishing spots is make friends in the fishing community. Okay. No one's going to give you a fishing spot, but I'll tell you, of the people that we've met in the fishing community, we've had so many people just be like, hey, you know what? In your guys' small boat, this lake that I know of would be great. And they'll send me a pin on Google and they're like, I appreciate you don't, tell anyone about it. Like, no problem. We won't tell anyone. And I have no problem telling people that I know as well, that I've developed, a relationship with, hey, this lake is great. We only fish it maybe once every other year. So go up there and fish this lake. Just don't tell anyone, right?
Yep.
And like, I have no problem doing that, but you can't just ask people you don't know.
Yeah.
Be friends with people. And eventually you can ask, be like, hey, there's a lot of people I know and they fish. They don't have a lot of friends that fish. There's other people like you out there that would be happy to fish with you. You know what I mean? Be like, hey, I got a small tin boat. You want to go fishing with me? I guarantee someone will want to go with you.
If anyone wants to see what happens, if anyone ever asks me for GPS coordinates, feel free. Message me on AOA_Andrew.
I recommend you
ask
do
me
this.
for GPS coordinates, and I'll send you some.
Yep. Do it. It's actually pretty funny what he does. Anyway, also a word of caution. Don't fish with random strangers. That should be obvious. The last thing I want you to do is an angered family member message AOA and be like, my son went fishing with a stranger and they found him in a big can decomposing. Then we'll have to change this to one of those murder mystery
find out
podcasts.
if that person lives in Oshawa or not before you say, I'll go fishing with you.
All right, so the last point, and I feel like this is probably the most important one that we're going to talk about tonight, is don't compare yourself to others. Fish your own journey.
Yeah, that's an important one, because if Jesse did that, he'd feel real bad because I did better than him this year. So
yeah, I have to take one for the team. The last 10 years, I've killed you. Yeah, but really, don't compare yourself to others. That goes with a lot of ways in life, like jobs, family, all that other stuff. When you're fishing is a hobby. It might be a passion for you. If you're listening to this podcast, it's probably something that you really enjoy doing. It may be something that, you just like to relax and enjoy and go out fishing. Other people, they're driven to, catch a good limit of bass, like bass tournament style. Like I want to catch, the best 5 bass, or I want to catch one really big bass or one really big muskie. Or maybe you're not goal driven at all. Maybe you just like spending time with friends. Mm-hmm. But if you are one of those driven persons that has goals and is trying to improve your angling, don't literally compare yourself to others. For one, social media, half of it is fake. 100% it's fake. Don't compare yourself to people on social media. It's all not real. Half these people make it look like they're catching fish every day, giant fish, and most of them aren't.
Yeah.
Okay. Don't feel bad. Like we said at the beginning of this podcast, like how many times have we gone out and just had a terrible day fishing?
Oh, yeah, it happens all the time.
It happens all the time. I'd say most of the time we go out, we catch fish, but...
That's why you see us post sunset photos.
Yes, exactly. But there are days when you get out and it's just the conditions are bad.
Yep.
And you know what? You work full time, like most people, and the only time you can fish is on the weekend when the lake is hammered.
Yeah.
So there are days when it's not a good day.
It was a very tough year. I wouldn't say it was a disappointing year. It was in the sense that, we had maybe 2 nice days in the water this year. It was actually good, together. I mean,
Yeah, I had personally, like, alone and with you, I had some good days apart from you.
Yeah.
With you, not so much, but you had some really good days. So it's give and take. Like,
yeah,
I'm happy Andrew caught one of his better muskies this year.
Yeah.
That he's ever caught. I caught one of my biggest largemouth this year that I've caught in probably 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
But together it was like mediocre.
Yeah.
But last year we had a really good year.
I got 3 new personal bests last year.
Yeah.
It was really awesome.
I just feel like we talked to a lot of people this year. If you had a bad year this year, it's not just you. A lot of
Yeah.
people weren't doing that good this year.
But at the same time, with that whole idea of not comparing ourselves to others, you could look online and see some other guy who, was nailing fish left and right supposedly this year.
Yeah.
But like you were saying, you can't believe everything you see on social media. And 2, I can look at that and make, hey, did I have as good a year as last year? No, I didn't hit any personal best this year. But I fished much harder water this year, and I was able to still get fish. Did I improve as an angler from the year before? Absolutely.
Yeah.
So when you are looking at, don't compare yourselves to others, but you can't compare yourself to yourself.
Compare yourself to yourself and see if you're progressing. So again, not to compare yourself to others. Some people, just like in sports or anything else, some people are just better at things. So for instance, I always use the example of like playing guitar. If you are like, you know what, I want to play guitar. I want to be like Eddie Van Halen. If you don't have that natural ability, you can practice every day of your life. You will never be that good. Mm-hmm. It's just that particular skill. You might be pretty good at it, but you'll never be that good. You'll never be like God level. Like you'll never be like, I'm Wayne Gretzky at hockey. Some people are like that. Like look at like Cooper Gallant. Okay.
Yeah.
Or look at like some of the pros like that fish the Elite Series. Those guys are hammers.
Yep.
Like the Johnson brothers. They fish tournaments around here. They're generally always winning them because they not only do they have a lot of experience, a lot of time on the water, but they're also just hammers. They're just they're insane.
They have an innate ability.
Yeah. And if I compared myself, like say me and Andrew fish tournaments, we'd be like way at the bottom the whole time.
Absolutely.
And if we compared ourselves to the Johnson brothers, you'd get super depressed.
Or half of the group.
Yeah.
You'd be like, yeah.
But that's a good example. Say like we compare ourselves to the Johnson brothers. You have to think there's such a difference. Mm-hmm. Not only are me and Andrew, we just don't have that insane raw skill that they have, but we also don't fish, 5 days a week on the water, have a $150,000 bass boat, all
the electronics to help locate the fish.
Yeah. So like you have to take it with a grain of salt. Like just compare yourself to yourself. Like Andrew said, the last year, like, am I doing better? Am I doing better in all these things? Am I, learning about fish behavior, learning about fish movement, focusing on, how to present your bait better, not focusing on the gear. Mm-hmm. I guess we didn't really talk about the presenting bait part, but like, like focus on techniques. Like, am I doing this technique properly? Don't we like, oh, I'm glad I have this $400 drop shot rod, but I don't know how to drop shot fish.
Yeah. And you know what though? Like I said, this year, the weather was on most of our trips.
It was terrible.
The weather was really bad. It's like a cold front. Every single time it was a trip for us, cold front rolled in. But you know what? We have a lot more experience catching cold fronts, and I have a lot more understanding on where I would choose to go next time, and it will happen. I'm going to go fishing again, and it will be a cold front. Mm-hmm. But now I have even more experience, and I have learned from what I did this year that the next time I know exactly, to do either those same lakes or different lakes or bodies of water. I know what I'm going to focus on, what kind of areas, what kind of presentations I want to use on a cold front just after a storm.
Yeah.
So that all that stuff is, I know that I have improved this year, even if, let's say, the statistics of my catches, they may not show it, but I know that, taking everything into consideration, we've done better this year. We have improved.
And really, the statistics of your catches it's not something you can even gauge.
Especially when, like Jesse says, we don't fish all the time, so there's so many variables. If you get out, a dozen times in a year, that is not enough. Like if I told you, hey, I interviewed 12 different people and they told me that this is the best car ever sold on market, they could tell you, yeah, it's the Ram 1500, or it's a Jeep. Does that make that true? No, I asked 12 people. That is not a statistic make. So you can't judge yourself just because you might not get out as much as these other guys who are fishing 300 days a year.
Yeah.
They can see almost by their numbers, because they're out there in all weather conditions for that whole year, how they stacked up.
Yeah. And you're not shooting hoops like basketball.
Yeah.
Basketball is like you shoot You shoot the ball, it goes into the hoop. The hoop isn't moving.
It's
the
a
hoop isn't
controlled
a living
environment.
thing. Fishing is totally different. You're facing and trying to hunt down living animals that have a mind of their own. You can't just go out and be like, you know what, today I'm going to catch, 28 bass. The next day, I only caught 5. I'm a complete failure. It's like, no, the fish change. They're not always going to be in the same spot. They're unpredictable. So don't literally think that, you have to always be at the high level. Like there's ups, there's downs, there's highs, there's lows.
Just like jig fishing.
Yeah. So anyway, that was a bit of a convoluted rant, but if you are improving as an angler and learning things and you tried a new technique, like for instance, I'm gonna give you an example. There's this guy named Julian on Instagram. He's a kayak guy, and he went out kayak fishing and caught his first muskie on a tube.
Yeah.
Or no, on a water wolf swim bait. But he's like, I've never caught a muskie. He goes out and he was
with
like,
the intention he wanted to catch a muskie.
Yeah. He goes out and slammed a fish, like a nice 40+ inch fish in his kayak.
Yeah.
I was like, that's great. You see guys like that learning a new skill. Somebody who is an accomplished angler, like you see this guy, he's catching bass, steelhead, like all this stuff. But he goes out and catches a muskie and he learned a new skill. And he can say, like, at the end of the year, like, yeah, I learned something new this year. That's great. That's an angler that's improving and learning.
I learned how to jig fish properly this year. Finally, I learned how to jig fish.
Welcome to 1999. Angel.
I know.
Just kidding.
But again, I never fished that technique. I was more comfortable with others, and I never challenged myself.
Yep.
But every year now, we try and choose a technique we're going to try and learn.
Yeah.
And then we work at it.
Next year for Andrew, you know what technique I'm going to make him learn?
What, skipping?
Yes.
I shouldn't have said it. What were you going to say?
So if you want to donate some fishing line to Andrew, because he's going to backlash.
You're like skipping BFS. I'm like, no.
So anyway, I hope that this episode kind of, if you're an angler that's trying to improve and get better at certain techniques, or if you're someone that's just been fishing a long time and you're like, you know what, I just need a little bit of a pep talk because I had a bad year or a slow year. I hope this helps you a little bit. Again, we're always on Instagram. If you want to send us a message, I'm always happy to send you some encouragement because I certainly need it myself. At this point, I would like to thank our Patreon members. We actually got a whole bunch of new ones in the last few days, which is great.
It's been so helpful because, like Jesse said, everything's been coming out of pocket. The podcast costs money, and we want to improve. We have plans next year. We're actually going to be having a meeting in a bit, Jesse and I, about what we want to do to improve the podcast even more so. And sometimes that does involve a bit more money because, again, to save time for editing, there's things you have to subscribe to so that you can have editing software to get cool noise clips that Jesse throws in, like this one here. Have fun with that, Jesse. Then those are, you have to subscribe to these things so that you can do it. And there's a lot more in the podcast that we didn't realize coming into it, and that I'm sure people that just listen to them like I did for years, you don't realize all the stuff. So we're super appreciative of those who are helping out because it is a huge help. It's not we can get it so it's not coming out of our pocket just to get this a weekly podcast to you. Then it's going to help us continue to do it for such a longer time.
Anyway, so we'd like to thank everyone again. We'd like to also mention, if you haven't given us a review yet, we're actually in a review competition with another podcast. I'm not going to tell you who it is, but if you can shoot us a review on Spotify, you can give us a star rating, and on Apple Podcasts as well. Rate us a little review, and if you rate us a good enough review, we might read it on the podcast next week. So please do that. And before we end, we are going to do the quote of the week. And Andrew has that.
Oh, no.
Andrew, think fast.
I'm going to say it was a tough year for everyone.
That's a terrible quote.